The biggest mistake I see salespeople make is they treat the demo like a product tutorial. Your job is not to go through every feature and piece of functionality. Your job is to give a sales demo, the value, the benefits, the pain points. Resist the urge to show too many features. Give a sales demo, not a product tutorial, number one. Number two, most demos are boring.
The perfect SaaS sales demo. What is it? What do you need to do? What do you need to say? Joining me today is a very seasoned sales executive and leader of sales teams, Matt Melnick. Matt, how are you today?
I'm great. Great to connect with you again, Raj. Like the good old days.
Yeah, it's like the good old days. Matt and I worked for the same company, Wealth Engine, years ago. I was in charge of marketing. Matt was in charge of all sales, about a 200-person company. And we collectively learned from each other. And Matt has some very strategic ways to do a sales demo when you are selling a SaaS product. So let's get right into it because I think people really want to know. This is part two of the conversation Matt and I have had. The first one was about the perfect discovery call. So Matt, last time we discussed the discovery call. How does a successful discovery call, and by the way, I'll have the notes, the link to that call, that podcast in the show notes. How does a successful discovery call really set the stage for an effective SaaS demo?
Boy, first of all, excited to be here. Excited, and like I said, excited to connect with you again and excited to talk to everyone and share what I've learned over 20 years in SaaS sales and seeing thousands of demos. Look, the reality of it is an effective discovery call makes all the difference in great follow-up, in a great demo. And the real reason is it's like watching game film. If you're a sports fan at all, you hear that teams watch game film all the time. And the reason they do that is so that they get a leg up when they go into the game. They can see how their opponent plays. They can see what their tendencies are. And so learning about your prospect in advance and then using that information in your demo helps you come in with a terrific game plan. It helps you look prepared. And I actually think that's really important. Not only, as I said, does it help you have a point of view and a game plan, but it helps you speak their language. And very importantly, it makes you look like you're a professional and like you do your work and you come prepared. So I think that's super important. So an effective discovery call, one where you take notes and then use that information, you should always prepare and use that for a demo.
So how do you start the call when it's the part two, which is the actual demo? You've already done the discovery. You have a good sense of there is a fit between the prospect and you, what you're selling. So now you want to get started with the demo. What are the first things you do? How do you start that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about the demo. We use this term demo, which is really a call or a meeting where you actually don't just talk about your product, you show it to them. But the meeting or call demo is really three phases or three stages, as I like to call. And let's say you have an hour, managing the clock is really important in these three stages. And the first stage is what I like to refer to as the recap. It's a recap of the discovery call. It's an additional discovery call if you have new people in the audience. And then the second part is the actual sales demo. And notice how I use the term sales demo. I'll get to that later. And that's where you show the product and give the visual reiteration of everything you've spoken about. And then the third part, which is equally as important as either of the first two, is the business discussion. And you always need to leave some time for that. And we'll get into that in a little while as well. Thinking about that and those three parts and thinking about your question, my absolute favorite type of demo is when I walk into the meeting or I get onto the Zoom. And not only are the people or person that I gave the discovery call to there, but there's other people. And I love that because it's a great time to really use all the information that you learned in the discovery call. And not only to get it validated by the people you met with, but to go out to the new people. And it's a way to show them that you understand, where they're coming from. I like to say you can use their own language and information against them to get buy-in and validation. But it's very important that you do that recap. It's very important that you go and say, I had a great meeting with Raj last week. For those of you that weren't there, let me explain to you quickly what we do. And I'd walk them through what we do so they can have good context. And then I would proceed to go through the information that I learned from Raj. And I'd say, we talked about these three things being very important for you. Do you all agree with those things? Does anyone else have anything to add? And I go around the room and ask each person, assuming it wasn't too large of a group. If it's another person or two or three, I'd go around the room and specifically call them out to get them to add insight and I would take notes and write it down and make sure that I know what was important to each person, because I want to then use that info during my sales demo. One last thing to add, if your demo participants are the same as your discovery, you still want to recap and you still want to get their validation and make sure nothing's changed and see if they still have the same point of view. It's just a really good way to get connected. So I love doing that. And I think that's, if you do that, that helps you have a much more strategic and personalized.
Do you add any questions about buying timeline or anything like that? Or do you wait for that to the business discussion?
Look, I think that's something that can definitely be addressed during the business discussion. But if it's something that you all had talked about previously, or you know that they are in a buying cycle, I think it's certainly okay to address that up front or to get validation. Again, if the person I met with in the discovery call told me that they're looking to make a purchase in the next 30 days, I think that's probably something that I would not shy away from and address and make sure that everyone shakes their head yes. And we don't see any confused looks like, what are you talking about?
That's right.
And if I think it's important, if you do, I don't think you should shy away from that. I think you should address it and say, can we get some clarity on this?
So the first thing would be obviously to set an agenda for the meeting, because you've got maybe 30 minutes and maybe an hour. So talk to me about the agenda.
So look, it's always nice to set an agenda so people have the right expectations. But my reason for setting an agenda, I have a very specific purpose around setting an agenda. It's not just to go through the course of events, although again, I think that's nice. I have a very specific purpose in setting an agenda, and my agenda setting is all about doing a time check. Do we have 30 minutes? Do we have an hour? Is there a hard stop? And the reason I want to do that time check is because it is imperative. I don't care what happens. You must leave 5 or more minutes at the end of the meeting to have a business discussion. And not only are you leaving that time to talk price and validate that they're in this buying cycle, but one of the key elements of it is you must leave the meeting with a calendar item planned on your calendar and someone else's. And the reason I say all this is I can't tell you how many meetings I've been a part of, not just demos, but any type of business meeting where you might have 30 minutes, you might have an hour, and the sales rep gets to the 30-minute mark on a 30-minute meeting, and all of a sudden everyone has to boogie. And what happens is they interchange, and I'm sure you've heard this, Raj, where people go, oh yeah, we got to go. We loved what we saw. Let me talk to the team, and why don't you call me next week? And maybe 1 out of 10 times you get the person next week. You could sit through 3, 4, 5 weeks of forecast meetings being like, oh yeah, I got to get Bob. He and I owe him a call. And the reason is you didn't have anything planned. Even if you had said, hey, Bob, I know you got to go. Let's put 5 minutes on the calendar next week so that you can check in with your team. But let's have a call scheduled so that we don't miss each other and go into Neverland. So to me, if you don't do that at the end of your meeting, it's a fail. Okay. So we'll talk about strategies for setting that time if you're still mid-meeting or mid-demo, but we'll get to that in a little while. But it's imperative that you get that on schedule. So to me, setting the agenda is all about telling the people, getting the time check, knowing if you have a hard stop or not, and then telling the people that we need to leave 5 minutes so that when you do leave 5 minutes at the end, it's not a surprise from the expected.
What are some of the other things that you find are keys to make sure that you have a successful demo? What do you do at the start?
So I think outside of obviously knowing your product and putting a game plan together and making sure you hit all the value points and all the things that they're looking for, I think there's 3 big picture things that are really easy, that are very easy for everyone to do. You don't have to be an incredible sales rep to think about these things and to do these things. But there are things that lead to much higher close rates because they lead to a better sales presentation. And let me tell you what they are. First one, the biggest mistake I see salespeople make is they treat the demo like a product tutorial. Let me tell you right now, your job is not to be a professional services rep or customer success rep and teach these people how to use the software. That is not your job. Your job is not to go through every feature and piece of functionality. Your job is to give a sales demo. Sales demo, product tutorial, very fine line between them, but a massive difference. A sales demo is a visual reiteration of everything you've talked about, the value, the benefits, the pain points. It's now going in and showing them how you're going to accomplish all these things that you've spoken about in the discovery call and in the recap. So that's number one. Make sure you're giving a sales demo. Resist the urge to show too many features, and resist the urge to talk about new benefits. There should be no new benefits brought in to the sales demo. You can show new features, but they have to equate to a benefit. So give a sales demo, not a product tutorial, number one. Number two, most demos are boring. Make them fun. Be enthusiastic. Show emotion. Draw the people in. Use your hands, use your language, use your eyes. Connect with people in the room if you're meeting. Call their name. If I'm giving a demo and you're on the other side, I'd be like, Raj, remember when you told me that XYZ is the most important thing to you all? This is exactly how we do it. Does that resonate with you? Can you see yourself using that? Would that benefit your team? Get that mini close, that validation right there. So I think that goes again to taking proper notes during the discovery call and being organized and prepared and having studied. You need to be able to dance and tell jokes all at the same time. But you have to have fun in the meeting. Fun sells. Enthusiasm sells. And the reason it sells is if I tell you like, oh my God, look at how easy this is, you're going to believe me because I sound like I'm believing myself. Fair point?
Yeah, you got to be excited about your product too. So that's going to get other people excited. And honestly, I love your point about being enthusiastic. Sometimes my little secret, if I'm going to do a Zoom call with somebody, you obviously can't do the following in person, but I will actually go do 10 push-ups before I get on a call. It just gets my blood flowing. It just gets my energy level up, especially if I've done a whole bunch of calls during the day and I'm doing something in the afternoon where my energy level is low. I need my 3 o'clock sugar cookie or something. I just go do some push-ups, get that blood going. And then when you're on the call, you got that energy level and they can feel it. They can feel it.
I think anything like that is terrific, but enthusiasm sells. I say this all the time. Successful sales reps somehow have the ability to make themselves come across as a consultant, not a sales professional.
Right.
People pay consultants. Okay. They hire and pay consultants for their insight. People fear sales reps. They're scared, SHITLES of them. They fear them. They're on guard against them. The minute you can make yourself feel like a consultant where the prospect is believing you and agreeing with you and taking your point of view, that's when you cross the divide and will have much higher close rates. Now, the third point that I was going to make, which also leads to higher close rates, is probably the simplest in theory, but the hardest in function to actually do. I can't tell you how many times I've sat through a meeting and had someone ask a question. And the first thing I see the sales rep do when they go to answer the question is go to grab the mouse because they want to show the person the answer in the product. And I'm here to say epic fail 90% of the time. The reason that's an epic fail is because you want to stay in control of the meeting. You have a game plan. You want to stay in control. Most of the questions that come are what I call noise questions. They're not really pertinent to where you are in the meeting. It's something someone thought of. It might not even be pertinent to their buying cycle. To their buying process. Now you need to know what's important and what's not, but you have a game plan and a flow and you want to maintain that flow. So what I teach sales reps all the time when I was managing sales reps, I used to teach them all the time. First of all, I wouldn't let you touch the mouse. You had to stay on your flow. So every time someone asked a question in practice, you have to sit on your hands. Okay. That gets it in their head. Okay. But also you have to learn how to simply say one word, yes or no. You don't have to answer every question with a long answer. You certainly don't have to answer every question with a how-to and show them. Simply say yes or no. Yes, that is something that we do. You know what? I'm going to get to that later, and I'll remind you when we get there that you asked the question. Good? Cool. Or this is the hardest thing, and this is where sales reps really struggle with the NO word, no, because they feel like they have to back it up. They feel like now that people aren't going to buy, and that's not true. It's just not true at all. You can simply say that's not something that we do at this point in time. And if there's a good reason for it, explain the reason, but you don't have to justify it. You can simply say no. Now, if you think that it's a really heavy question and you need to understand, you could say, no, we don't do that. Instead, we do something else. Could you explain to me why you asked that question or where it's coming from? You might want to understand. So you might want to follow it up with a question. Don't be afraid to say yes or no and go right back into your game plan. Like wherever you were, go back into it. So to me, those three things are really some key trips. Make sure it's a sales demo, not a product tutorial. Less is more. Bring enthusiasm and confidence to the table. Use their information, engage them and ask questions and validate what we call mini closes. And make sure you simply say yes or no and resist the urge to show them and touch the mouse. So those are some things that I think every sales rep can think about and do, and it will dramatically improve your close rates.
One of the things that you really drilled home on this segment was making sure that you're in control. And a lot of times prospects, as they're going through the demo, they're going to ask questions that could derail you. So what do you do? What tactics can you deploy to actually keep that discussion on track?
That's a great question. And I think this is where lots of sales reps lose ownership of the meeting. We talked about a couple of them. Resist the urge to show everything. Simply say yes or no. And I think you can also say to the person, that is something that we do. Would you mind if I showed you that later? And I know I'm repeating myself from before, but I think to me, you have to just be confident. Sales reps are like to please. They feel like if they come back and say the no word, that their prospect isn't appreciative of them. So they like to please. They're scared of losing. Don't be scared of losing. Plan to win. So I think there's a big difference there. And in planning to win, you know your game plan. Simply say yes or no. Tell them you'll address it later and move on and keep the flow of the meeting. So I can't reiterate that enough. If you're able to do that, to me, your close rates will go up tremendously because, listen, we talked about this. Most demos are an hour long. If you have some new participants, you spend 15 or 20 minutes up front recapping and doing some good discovery, which is super important. Your demo might be 40, 45 minutes long, and then you have business discussion. So you don't really have spare time often. So you need to really manage the clock, and not enough people do that. So I think by taking control or keeping control of the meeting, you own the clock. And if you own the clock, you'll get to have your business discussion and you'll get to put something on the calendar as a next step. And that's a success and a win.
Yeah. Now, one of the biggest things you have to do when you're giving a demo is to make sure that the stuff that you are showing is relevant for the pain points of your prospect. So how do you match your SaaS features to the client's pain points effectively while you're doing the demo?
So there's sort of two ways that I like to think about it. Number one, look at what sells in your product, what the oomph is, what the money shots are, what's powerful, why people buy. So you want to make sure to show those things regardless. But you certainly want to use your prospect's words and language and terminology. So, and I didn't talk about this because we did it during the discovery call session that we did. But as a way to recap, I think it's incredibly important to take notes. And I would always circle certain things that I wanted to use again and write the person's name next to who said it. Excuse me. I think the way that you pick what to show is that you go through your main set, what you know is important, and then you use the people's terminology and you associate their names and their terminology, as I just mentioned, to that. So that's one way to personalize it. The other way is obviously if you have some choices about what you can or cannot show, I would go back to the things that we talked about and say, is this relevant to what they're buying? You may have 5 main value drivers of why people buy your software. And let's say that 2 of them are completely irrelevant to these people. They're not going to use them. They're not here for it. You could choose not to show that. If you have time, you could also choose to show them because you never know if it's a different project. You never know if maybe someone else that's new in the room sees value in it. But certainly if you don't have time, you could eliminate those things. So I think that's the way I go about it. But to me, the more important part is show what you have that's great and use their wording.
Now, I want to hop over to one sec of a sales demo that is my favorite part. And you, throughout the years, have heard me say this line, facts tell, stories sell, all the time. I think it is one of the biggest things that you can do to actually get your point across. So now, can you share some examples of how you use storytelling to illustrate your product's value?
Sure. And first of all, I agree with you. Using stories is a great way, again, to get them to think of you in that consultative viewpoint. Okay. It's not just Matt talking. It's Matt quoting other powerful people that they'll recognize by name of company or title, or they might even know the person. They're in the same industry or something. But saying the vice president of communications for Southwest Airlines used our product to do this, that brings massive credibility. I like to teach people that you should always have 4 or 5 stories in your arsenal. You certainly have more. And just remember one thing, as you pick which stories to use during your meetings, during your presentation, during your demo, just remember that you might be tired of hearing them, but they're new to them. So this is the first time the person's saying it. So if you give it with enthusiasm and credibility, they're going to buy that hook, line, and sinker. Now, you got to take some notes, because if you have to do a second demo, you don't want to use the same story to the same audience. So you might
Right.
have to remember what you said. But I think having an arsenal of 4 to 5 stories is highly valuable and leads to a much better sales demo, because it brings a lot more
Yeah.
credibility, and it takes it out of just me saying it.
I find that when you have metrics inside your stories, that makes an even bigger difference. I know when you and I were working together, there's getting these stories is sometimes difficult, but you just got to go talk to your customers. And what I do sometimes to collect these stories is I'll just go to somebody and say, "Hey, tell me about the last time you logged into our software. What were you looking to do? And tell me about the last time you had some success with the software. What did it enable you to do?" And they will just start talking. And next thing you've got notes, and then you keep asking, "Hey, can you give me some metrics? Like how much time did that save you? Or how much money did you earn as a result of this?" So then when you've got your story in your back pocket, you can say, "Oh, yes, we had XYZ generate $5 million using the following process. This company saved $300,000 using XYZ process." And that just really brings your demo to life, is when you're using numbers.
Totally agree. And I'm really glad that you brought up the part about metrics. That's something that I think is very important. And I forgot to mention. Yeah, anytime that you can use numbers or something besides, they said this, they love this.
Mhm.
Anytime you can bring some fact into the equation, makes it all the merrier.
Yeah, because when you think about it, at the end of the day, what the buyer's buying is a transformation. And so numbers help you sell that transformation. Matt, I want to pivot to something that you mentioned earlier. You said the word mini close. So let's do a little bit of a double click on that. Could you explain what a mini close is and why that's so crucial?
Yeah. So a mini close, in my opinion, is not just waiting until the end to get validation. It's getting validation along the way, so that when you
Hmm.
get to that business discussion, you can almost make a statement about where they stand as opposed to ask a question. For
Yeah.
example, if along the way I've said a meeting with Bob, and Bob told me that something was very important, and I get to that point in the demo and I say, "Bob, this is how you collect all of your analytics. These are the data points that you see. You talked to Matt about those being incredibly important for you to have on demand. Do you see now, how is this what you were looking for?" And Bob says, "Yes." You now put that in the bank. It's a mini close, it's a check, it's a positive. And at the end of the call, you'll say, "Listen, as we were going through the product, here's what I heard. Bob told me that analytics was very important, and we agreed that that the platform meets your needs from an analytics point of view. Susan said that she needed something that had a really easy interface, and the team agreed multiple times during the meeting that this was as easy to use as they've ever seen." Those are examples of mini closes. And that's an example of how you use the mini close at the end. Instead of having to go back and say, "What'd you all think? Was it easy to
Hmm.
use? Did you see the analytics?" Like, you make a statement and get them to shake their head and validate it at that point. And now you have a win. So those are examples of mini closes. But it all stems from a really well organized discovery call and taking notes. So it doesn't just happen magically. You got to come in and organize. And so I'll tell you one thing that I used to do when I was a sales rep, and when as a manager, I used to train people to do this. I would do my discovery call, and then as I went into my demo, I'd write some notes down from the discovery call on the top of my page. Okay. Or if you want to do it on the computer, you could certainly do it on the computer. But I'd write some things down that I wanted to make sure I talked about in this meeting. And I would always have the top of my page in front of everybody. I'd have interesting information that I could write down and use that information in the meeting. So I think you need to come prepared, you need to study, and you need to be organized. And if you do, you can mini
Yeah.
close along the way. It makes the meeting more interesting, and it makes the business part of the meeting much more organized and efficient.
That's a lot of very valuable insights in just that segment alone. I think just these mini closes where you're looking to just get them to say yes and get validation along the way, by the end of that conversation, they've more or less bought in already. And the actual tying the bow is a lot easier because you've got all that validation. Matt, let's go over to one of the biggest topics that people struggle with, and that is handling objections and keeping your audience engaged, especially throughout the objection handling process. So, how do you address questions and objections in a way that maintains momentum?
Sure. Look, objections can come in all sorts of fashions. We talked about one of them, which is a question that might be a no. And I would say that You handle objections with class. You don't want to get combative with people. Certainly saying no to something and asking why is that important to them. It didn't sound like this was important during the meeting. That's something that you could do. I think when you're talking about features that competitors may have, you may want to, I'm a big fan of not bashing competitors. I like to instead prop up our product. This is how we approach this. We think it's very value oriented. We've chosen to go this route instead of this route because don't be afraid of, not every product does everything for everyone. So don't be afraid of saying no. Don't be afraid of not having a feature, but certainly you want to understand why that's important to someone. And then once you understand that, you want to show how we approach it instead and explain why and see if that meets their needs.
I think that's really important because there's an old saying, you sell what you've got. And so you can talk all day till you're blue in the face, go back to your engineering team, your product team, say, we need to build this feature because that's what I'm getting on these demos. There's a whole process for figuring out what features you actually should be building, but sell what you've got. That's pretty key. What are some of the other objections? For example, price. That's oftentimes people will have various reactions. I know when I see somebody go, whoa, that's too much, or let me think about that. And they just kick the can down the road because they don't actually want to buy your product, but it's because of the price. And then maybe they're being too polite to say something. How do you handle that price objection?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a fan of talking about price early. I like to give a range of pricing.
Me too. Yeah.
Unless you know the exact price for a group, I'm a fan of giving a range. And you're guessing sometimes, depending on how every company prices differently. Some companies have more variable pricing. Some companies have a fixed price based on the size of the organization they're selling to. So it depends. But I do giving a range of price and sort of feeling them out in the first meeting. I would never leave a discovery call and go into a demo without giving them some understanding of what the price is. You know why I don't want to do that? I don't want to waste my time. I don't need to set up a demo. They're thinking it's $5 and I'm telling them 50,000 and they're not going to be able to get that done for 10 years. I don't want to waste my time. I'd rather part as friends, in the first 10 minutes. So I respect my own time and I respect their time. So I like to get that out of the way. Now, most products are typically market priced. And what that means is there's been testing in the market. This is not the first time we're selling our product for this price. So other people have bought it. And I think you need to be comfortable with sharing the price, knowing that others have bought it comfortably. So don't be scared about throwing out the price. But here's the number one thing I'll say. When throwing out a price, remember this. You can always lower the price. You can never raise it. So if you're asking me to choose a price that I have to throw out, I'm going to throw out a higher price over a lower price. Because the worst thing that can happen is me telling you that something's $8,000 and then being like, oh, we thought it was like 20 or 30. Nothing you can do. You can't raise
all that
it.
money on the table. Yep.
If you say it's 30 and they're like, that's a little steep. We were thinking $19,000, $20,000. You could always politely, professionally work your way systematically down. You could say, we have solutions that are in the 20K range. Let's talk about what's important for you from a benefits and functionality standpoint. And let's see where we end up. And I'll do my best to work with you to try to get you to a price that's comfortable. Boom. You're still in the game. Okay. So I think it's important to not be afraid to talk price and to certainly work your way down as opposed to trying to work up.
So usually this kind of takes you to the tail end of that demo. So how do you wrap that up succinctly while you reiterate the value and then transition to the business discussion? And also, what happens if you're running out of time?
So awesome question. I'm glad you asked that last one. I think there's two things to think about here. Let's break this question into two. There's how do you transition to the business discussion, which we already said is a must-have. It's a fail. I will fail you. I will give you an F if I'm listening to your meeting and it ends with, we all got to go. And you don't get to have a business discussion. It's a fail. Okay. So it does take, it's a skill to get there. Because again, you don't want to disappoint people. So let's break this down into two parts. The art of transitioning to the business discussion, especially if you're running out of time or if you don't have enough time. And then secondly, let's talk about what you want to accomplish in the business discussion. So first, the way that you get transition to a business discussion is first by talking about it up front. Remember, we said that one of the sole purposes of agenda setting is to do a time check to see if everyone has a hard stop. And if they have a hard stop at 12 noon, we know that 11:52 or 11:53 or somewhere in that time, we start to have to transition because we must leave some time at the end. And you have to assume that people are going to jump off a minute or two early because they want to get to the next call on time, right? And of course, the call after every demo seems to be with someone's CEO. So it's a very important call always. So you got to leave time, and that goes to managing the clock and setting the expectations up front. Part one. Part two of the transition is you have to watch the clock, okay? And you have to know at 11:52, if you just finish a section of your demo, but you have 10 minutes more, you have to be willing to say, Raj, I have about 10 or 15 minutes more, and I'd up it because you don't want them to say keep going. So I'd say I have 10 or 15 minutes more. We only have about 7 minutes left. You guys have a hard stop. I need a couple minutes of your time to just get your feedback, plan for what's next, and get some stuff on the calendar. So I'm going to stop here. I'm happy to stay after if anyone wants to see, if you want to do that, or you could say we could plan to reconvene in a week or tomorrow or whatever. But you have to be able to say 11:52, I have to stop. I'd like to transition, start scheduling next steps and stuff and getting your validation. Are you guys okay with that? And they'll always say yes.
What are those? What is that part, those next steps? How do you do that?
Obviously, you want to get their validation. And we talked about using the mini closes to make a statement instead of asking a question. Raj, and team, I really enjoyed being able to show you not just show you our product, but how our product met the three needs. You guys told me that you were interested in something that had analytics, was very easy to use, and could be used by a different array of people. I'm making this stuff up. As we went through the demo, I got confirmation from you that we do all of these things. Told me that he bought into this. Susie said she buys into this. Boom. Again, I know I've repeated this a couple of times, but I think it's important. You see how we're using the information that we learned along the way to get them to shake their heads and say yes. So now the logical next step is let's talk about pricing. If we maybe everyone in the room isn't familiar with it, and let's get their confirmation that the pricing meets the benefits. And then the natural next step becomes to go into a buying cycle. Maybe there's more technical demo or something. Depends on your specific cycle, but you'll know what the natural next step is. And I would suggest that step. And if they say yes, it is imperative that you find out who needs to be part of that. And you try to schedule it at least with someone right now. Even if they say we need to get together and talk, you have to say, great, Raj, why don't you and I, as the people who've been communicating and the leaders here, why don't we put 5 minutes on the calendar, for tomorrow? You guys will talk today. Let's get on the calendar. Let's get on a call tomorrow at 12:30. And even if it's for 5 minutes, that way we don't miss each other. Get that scheduled. That is such an effective way to keep deal flow going. Okay. A couple of other things that you want to do in the business discussion. You want to start, if the natural next step is to go into sort of a buying process. Okay. They've got the visual validation that the product meets their needs. They've agreed that price is within range, within reason. You're going to send them maybe a formal proposal that you review, but they've agreed that everything meets their need. They've agreed that you're the choice. I would start to talk about what their procurement process looks like. Do not be afraid of this. Most sales reps are afraid to ask about attorneys and procurement people. And they're hoping and wishing that they're not involved. And I don't want to hope and wish. And on the last day of the quarter, when I'm trying to close the deal, find out that there's an attorney involved. I want to know a month before because I want to manage that process. That's a whole other call, that manage the procurement process. But I would want to know if they understand what their procurement process is, because I'm not asking the question as much for me. I'm asking, do they know? Because lots of times the people we sell to don't buy a lot of things. And they might look around the room and be like, I don't know, do we have a procurement person? And someone might say, yeah, Jan is our procurement person. She handles for marketing. She handles all procurement. Do you have our attorneys involved? Typically, Jan can handle the contract. If it's difficult things, we bring our attorney in, but Jan's the person. Great. Can we set up a call with Jan? Great. We have a standard contract. It's written in light of our software. It has protections in place for you and us based on the nature of the product we sell. It's specifically written for our product. Why don't I send that over to you so that Jan can start to take a look at it? And by the way, what I'm doing, I'm not just accelerating the process here by getting things going. I'm making sure that we don't get caught with them coming back to us and saying, here's our contract. Now they may still do that, but at least you've already told them that ours is lightweight. It's 5 pages. It's specifically written and has protections for both of us based on the products and capabilities and technologies you're buying. Theirs is going to be 50 pages. It's going to be boilerplate. It's going to have nothing to do with what they're buying. And now at least you're setting the table to have that discussion, because no attorney at our company wants to read a 50-page agreement to buy $50,000 worth of software. $1 million worth of software, go for it. Standard 50, 75, 100K deals, no. So I'm starting to set that dialogue. I'm starting to set the traps today to protect against that. So
I think you and I have seen this so many times that deals just completely get stalled because the other side, the prospect side, has a lawyer that needs to get through it. And literally we have seen things wait 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, just dragging feet because the lawyer just never got around to it. Or they have all these nitpicky things to, I hate to say it this way, but almost to justify their salary because they are making markups in the vein of protecting the company. So sometimes that's really a dragging kind of thing. Yeah.
I'm going to say one thing in that regard. The procurement discussion that's a topic that we could talk about on a whole nother call that I don't think enough people really pay attention to, is how to manage procurement. They run scared. But I think setting up a call with people in procurement, I think giving them context as to what we do and showing, look, every product's different. You might have, if you're not collecting sensitive customer data or proprietary information, if it's generic information that's coming through your system, you might want to tell them that so that they know that their risk level has gone down. They don't have a lot of risk here. You're not collecting highly sensitive financial data and stuff. You want to say all that, and you want the procurement person to understand what they're buying so that they manage their risk level accordingly. And so I think it's very important to do that, to set that call up, to walk them through what we do, to have your buyer on the call explain why they're buying this and what the benefits are, both from an ROI standpoint and just a business intelligence standpoint. And that way they have context of what they're doing. I'm also a fan of putting some incentives in place to manage the clock. I wanted them to buy at a certain time. And it's a lot easier to go to a procurement person at the last week of the month or quarter and say, listen, we did put some incentives in place. I'd really appreciate if you could get to the legal, because the incentives were tied to this time frame. I think that's a good strategy to have as well. Doesn't mean you need to give the house away, but having something in place, no one wants to lose an incentive.
Yeah. And so I think, Matt, this was really insightful. Great talking points about how you do that perfect SaaS sales demo. We're going to do one more in this series, which is the follow-up. How do you close that deal after you've done the discovery, after you've done that sales demo, and there's still these follow-up steps. So we teased that a little bit today. We're going to much more depth in a future podcast, and we'll keep you posted on that one. Matt, thanks again for a very insightful conversation.
Awesome. I loved it. I always love connecting with you, Raj.